Today we back with Rhapsody. Here we have the book, and the next poem is Crusoe in England. The name Robinson Crusoe is very familiar for all literary students. Robinson Crusoe is the most famous castaway in English literature. The man who was on an island for such a long period, who had to survive alone on an island. Robinson Crusoe is Daniel Defoe's most famous novel, written in 1719. It is about a person who was shipwrecked and had to pass a great deal of his lifetime in solitary confinement in an island, where he learned a great many survival tactics. So today we have Elizabeth Bishop using the name Crusoe in her poem. So let us see, what does Elizabeth Bishop's poem have to do with Defoe's Crusoe? Crusoe in England. So here we see this is a part where Crusoe is back in England. At a later stage, Robinson Crusoe was found by the sailors, the new ship that arrived on the island, and he's taken back to England, to his homeland. And here Elizabeth Bishop is telling us about his feelings when he is back in England. A new volcano has erupted, the papers say, and last week I was reading where some ship saw an island being born. At first a breath of steam 10 miles away, and then a black fleck, basalt probably, rose in the mate's binoculars. So now here Crusoe is still following up on news about the sea. We know that he was a seafarer, he was very much interested in his adventures on the sea. And back in England, he has heard this news. He is reading on his news that a new volcano has erupted, and certain people in a particular ship, they noticed that a new volcano had erupted and a new island was being formed. First there was steam, then he says that a black fleck, basalt is a volcanic rock. So all this a mate is seeing through his binoculars. They named it, and these people who found this island, they named it. But my poor old island is still un-rediscovered, un-renamable. None of the books have ever got it right. So Crusoe is sitting there, and from the beginning, from the very first paragraph, we can see that there is the binary opposition. This is not a man sitting in a island far away and being nostalgic about England, his homeland. This is just the opposite. This is a man sitting in his homeland, England, and being rather nostalgic about the island that he was cast away, where he had to suffer. He says, my poor old island. There is a sort of affection in those words. My poor old island is un-rediscovered, un-renamable. Nobody has named my island. Nobody has gone there. Nobody has been able to rediscover it or name it. None of the books ever got it right. Nobody has written the true history about it. Here we see that this is a dramatic monologue because it is said in the voice of a man who is reminiscing. It is a soliloquy. He is into introspection, talking out loud. So this Crusoe seems quite far apart from Defoe's Crusoe. We know that Daniel Defoe's Crusoe was a doer. He reached an island, and the most amazing thing about him, the most wonderful thing about him is that he kept his sanity. He kept his stability. You would expect a man to go crazy, to go insane after days alone on an island. But Defoe's Crusoe does not go insane. In fact, he starts organizing things. He is so methodic in his ventures every day. We know how he starts growing grapes, how he starts taking in sheep, and he makes a whole pasture. He has sheep and meat for his daily food, and he sees to it that he has dairy, he has milk, and with so much hard work every day, we see him doing carpentry, building a cabin, building a small canoe so that he can just venture out into the water for fish. So he was every day working so hard at survival. But is Elizabeth Bishop's Crusoe the same? This seems to be more of a sentimental person, more of a thinker, not a doer. So everywhere we see that binary opposition coming in. Well, I had 52 miserable small volcanoes I could climb with a few slithery strides. So just by a few slithery strides, could be just a few steps, very easy steps, I could climb all over those 52 volcanoes. Now we see that Bishop is describing the island. Volcanoes dead as ash heaps. They were not volcanoes that were going to break out. No, they were dead, sooty things. I used to sit on the edge of the highest one. They were small volcanoes and count the others standing up. I used to count all those volcanoes, naked and laden, with their heads blown off. I think that if they were the size I thought the volcanoes should be, then I would become a giant. So here we see the utter contrast to Defoe's Crusoe. There, Crusoe, in a jocund manner, even says, I am the king of this island. I alone am going to rule over the gulls and the sheeps. But this Crusoe is so bored out of his mind. He is sitting there and he is literally counting the volcanoes. He's sitting there hanging his legs and, just sitting and looking around him in such a way that we feel that there is no pastime for him. He knows every inch of the flora and fauna of that island. And he is now imagining himself to be a giant. He says that if the volcanoes are the size I thought they should be, then I am a giant. So he is being carried away in his imagination. The more and more of the thinker is presented here, the philosopher is presented here. And if I became a giant, I couldn't bear to think what size the goats and turtles were, or the gulls, or the overlapping rollers. So here, Bishop is showing us that what is the company that Crusoe has. Crusoe is isolated, alienated, alone, and he is wondering about the world around him, about his own existence in connection with the world around him. So here we see the philosophy that what is man's existence if not that he cannot connect it with those around him. We are a certain being. Why? Because of our connections with the world around us. Our very existence is given meaning by the human beings around us, by our place in society. But here, Crusoe has to make meaning of himself in a place where he cannot even see his own physical self. He cannot even see a mirror, let alone another human being. He says, I can't bear to think what size the turtles, the gulls, and the goats, and the huge waves, all that would be. So now we see that he is really letting loose his imagination. And we can also see that here is Bishop's voice telling that a man cannot be content with just goats, huge turtles, and the sea around him, the immense island around him. None of it is life enough for a human being. And again, Elizabeth Bishop was very famous for her description of flora and fauna. She had traveled very vastly in France, Spain, North Africa, Italy, America. So many of her travels are taken the form of poetry, and she's described. This very poem is taken from a series called Geography 3 series. So that is, She has gone very much into the geographical description. She is a poet known for her technical brilliance in the use of the English language as well as her description using geographical terms. A glittering hexagon of rollers, closing in, but never quite glittering and glittering through the sky, was mostly overcast. So now she's describing the sea that is rolling in, the huge tumultuous waves, those waves that has kept Crusoe for so long away from his homeland. And the sky is always overcast, which gives us the idea that this was an island with a climate that was quite rainy, quite humid, rather hot, wet, humid. These are the images that are coming to our mind because of all the clouds that are overcast. And these clouds could also symbolize Crusoe's mind, which is overcast with sorrows. My island seemed to be a sort of cloud dump. All the hemispheres, leftover clouds, arrived and hung above the craters. Their parched throats were hot to touch. So again, we see the scientific and geographical terms. She uses the scientific terms of hemisphere, above the craters, the leftover clouds coming in and hanging above on the sky. So these all give us a mental image. So imagery is very important here. She is giving the imagery of empirical reason. This is not a romantic imagination alone. This is empirical reason. She is giving exactly how a deserted island would be. The huge turtles waddling around and the volcanoes, the cloud. She says it is a cloud dump. All the leftover clouds seem to be hanging in there. Was that why it rained so much? And why sometimes the whole place hissed? Now, Crusoe is trying to make sense of the meaning of the world around him. Why was that hissing sound continuously? So, this is man thinking about his environment. He's trying to gauge the reason. What is this hissing sound? Could it be because of the atmosphere being so dense and humid? Or is it the sky? Or is it the sea that is bringing in this sound? And is this the reason why it rained so much? So this shows us that there was a lot of rain too. The turtle slumbered by, high-domed, hissing like tea kettles. Now he's coming to the conclusion that maybe the hissing sound is from the turtles. Is it those turtles that are going by with those high-domed, huge shells, those reptiles that are quite far from man? They are not a good enough companion for man. Could it be them who are making this hissing sound, is what he is asking. And I'd have given years or taken a few for any sort of kettle, of course. Now we see why is he so upset about the hissing sound. Crusoe would like the hissing sound of the tea kettle. The tea kettle that reminds him of back home England, where he could have a cup of tea rather than the mash of water and herbs or whatever concoction that he could make in the island. He would rather, he even says that I would give up a few of my years. I don't mind shortening my life if I could peacefully have a cup of tea. Not only does he not mind shortening his own life, he doesn't mind shortening somebody else's life too. He says, I would have given years or taken a few. I'm ready to kill for a cup of tea. That is exactly what Bishop is telling here. The falls of lava running out to sea would hiss. I turned and then they proved to be more turtles. So on one moment he would think, is it the sea coming in? Is it the lava out to the sea? And the next moment it would be the turtles hissing, more sound. So again and again, the monotonous flora and fauna of the island is enveloping him. The beaches were all lava variegated, black, red, and white and grey. The marbled colors made a fine display. So Now he is also describing the beauty, the colors, black, red, white, and grey. There are these beautiful colors of the sand and the rocks that make the island a beautiful image. And at the same time, also show the various colors that are going through in his own life. And I had water spouts, oh, half a dozen at a time. Far out they'd come and go, advancing and retreating, their heads in cloud, their feet in moving patches of scuffed up white. Glass chimneys, flexible, attenuated, sacerdotal beings of glass. So here he describes how the lava would rush into the water. And he had a lot of water spouts. There were the spout of water that was coming from the earth, and these natural resources of pure water gave him water to drink, water to bathe, water to use in his cooking. And they would come in and go, advancing, retreating, their heads in cloud, their feet in moving patches. So he is describing them as glass chimneys, and he would watch the water spiral up in them like smoke. So all these beautiful description is going on around him. Here we see, if we take Defoe's Crusoe, every day, like a king in an island, he was discovering more and more about the scientific reasons about his environment, as well as how to live in such an environment. Whereas Bishop's Crusoe says, these are all beautiful, yes, but not much company. We see that Bishop's Crusoe is talking more and more about the loneliness, the alienation, the sense of never belonging, the sense of never fitting in. So now if we consider Robinson Crusoe is the ultimate wasp man, we can say, the white Anglo-Saxon male, the man who is dominating, the man who is conquering, the man who says I, and in his very novel, it is representing the Western ideology of capitalism, where I alone is sufficing. I alone is going and conquering an entire land, and I am bringing it up according to my philosophy. And what made Robinson Crusoe stay there with his sanity? It is the knowledge, or because he felt that he was enlightened by the Bible and Western ideologies of faith and Christianity. But this poor Crusoe, Bishop's Crusoe, does not have the confidence of that white man or that supremacist or the capitalist. This is purely a castaway. He does not feel that he can conquer the island, rather, he is at the mercy of the island. So, this binary opposition, this contrast is most important. I often gave way to self pity. Do I deserve this? I suppose I must. I wouldn't be here otherwise. Was there a moment when I actually chose this? So now he is delving deep into the mind of Crusoe. Crusoe is questioning his existence. Why did I end up alone on that island? What, am I too in some way responsible for my position in society? Am I merely a victim of circumstances, or have I created my fate? Now, these are all the existential questions that a man may have about himself. I don't remember, but there could have been. So he's saying, maybe I too am at fault. I ran away from home. I ran and got into a ship, and I was shipwrecked. So somewhat of my circumstances were dictated by me. So can I not pity myself, or should I blame myself? So as students of literature, there is a great deal of questions that you need to ponder about in these. Every line of this poem is making us question our position in society and the meaning of existence, the meaning of a sense of belonging, and also free will on one side and circumstance and fate on another. What's wrong with self pity anyway? With my legs dangling down familiarly over a crater's edge, I told myself pity should begin at home. So the more pity I felt, the more I felt at home. So the poet now feels that she deserves pity. She needs to pity herself. So, before I pity the world around me, I am in dire need of pity or sympathy. So these are all emotions that Defoe's Crusoe never asked for. Defoe's Crusoe was somebody at the center of the universe. He was white, he was a male, he was heterosexual, he was a conqueror, he was a doer, he was a fighter, he was a survivor. And we see that Bishop's Crusoe was marginalized. He was the other. He was never in the center, he was on the periphery. And though it is the voice of a man speaking out, Bishop has used, in great incongruity, she has used the voice of a single man. But this is truly the voice of a woman who is actually speaking here. It is the poet speaking through the voice of Crusoe. And she says, the more pity I felt, the more at home I felt. The sun set in the sea, the same odd sun rose from the sea, and there was one of it and one of me. The island had every one kind of everything, one tree snail, a bright violet blue, with a thin shell crept over everything. So now, by mentioning the word one several times, there was one sun and there was one person here alone. There was one kind of tree snail which was violet, which was beautiful. It had its own shade of color and beauty, and it crept over everything. But in all this, there is an essence of aloneness, oneness. There is no partner here. And over one variety of tree, again, there was one variety of tree, a sooty scrub affair. Snail shells lay under these in drifts. And at a distance, you'd swear that they were bed of irises. There was one kind of berry, a dark red. I tried it one by one and hours apart. So now by telling us that there was one kind of everything around her, Bishop is showing us her own quest for identity. She is standing alone as if in an island. And here we see that Crusoe, when he is back home in England, why should he feel loneliness? No, it is a place vastly populated, it is his own homeland. But isn't it possible for a person to be in their own homeland amidst people they love and still feel alienated, lonely, almost as lonely as Crusoe on his island? So these are the very deep, complex thoughts that Bishop is bringing to our attention. She says there was a kind of berry there. It was dark red. I tried it one by one, hours apart. So this shows us that Crusoe had a great deal of time at hand. He had no deadline. There was nothing to finish. There was no calendar with which to set his time. So he was eating the berries one after the other, hours apart. Now there could be also another reason. These are forest berries. He is discovering an island, and it wouldn't be wise to eat it all at once. What if it is poisonous? So he has to eat it hours apart. He has to see that there is no ill effect for that berry. Some acid and not bad, no ill effects. And so I made some home brew. I drink the awful fizzy, stinging stuff and went straight to my head and play my homemade flute. So here he says that these berries, they did not have any bad taste. They were slightly toxic, slightly acidic, but good enough to make some homemade brew. He made alcohol or wine with the berry. He drank that. He got drunk on it. And he used to play his flute, which made all sorts of abysmal sounds. I think it had the weirdest scale on earth and dizzy, whoop and dance among the goats. So once I got dizzy, once I was able to forget myself with this homemade brew, I would be dancing around with the goats. Homemade, homemade, but aren't we all? I felt a deep affection for the smallest of my island industries. No, not exactly, since the smallest was a miserable philosophy. So now again, we can once again go back into Crusoe. Crusoe, Daniel Defoe's Crusoe could actually be called a book about creativity or self help, or how you have a kit, make it yourself kit, where you can make a table or a chair or some kind of beautiful artwork. Crusoe's island was pretty much a make it yourself kit. He was sitting and he was making everything by hand from the start. So, but Bishop's Crusoe is making a drink to make him forget the sad things that are happening in his life, his own alienation. So he says that here we feel that creativity does not come from being amidst society and or being in between people or enjoying oneself. Sometimes creativity spouts from isolation. And the last line in this paragraph is no, not exactly, since the smallest was a miserable philosophy. So the smallest of his inventions was a miserable philosophy, a philosophy that would help Crusoe to live and survive.